Hello and welcome to another episode of Material Matters with Grant Gibson. I've done more than 100 shows now. However, for listeners who might be new to all this, the idea is that I speak to a designer, maker, artist or architect about a material or technique with which they're intrinsically linked and discover how it changed their lives and careers. Today I'm talking to Jeremy Maxwell Wintrebert. Jeremy is a Paris-based designer and artist obsessed with blown glass. In an eclectic career that has seen him travelling through the USA and Europe before settling in France in 2007, he's shown work in V&A, Vessel Gallery in London and Palais de Tokyo, amongst others. His pieces are also held in a number of public collections, including Bibliotheque de France de l'École Nationale de Chartres and Germany's European Museum of Modern Glass. In 2016, Jeremy was the subject of a feature-length documentary about his work and extraordinary career, entitled Heart of Glass. While in 2019, he was awarded the Prix Bettencourt pour l'intelligence de la main. Jeremy, how are you?
Yeah, I'm very good, thank you.
Good. We're on Zoom at the moment, but it'd be good to know where you are.
So you're actually at my studio in Paris, in the basement, one of the basements, and this used to be a recording studio, so the sound should be quite good.
Yeah, there's no echo. Echo is the bane of a podcaster, and I'm not detecting any echo at all. Can we talk a little bit about your setup? Because I think you have not one, but three studios. Am I right in saying that?
Actually, I have one glass studio,
right?
One metal studio. We have a sort of an office space. So it's a big space for, all the admin and graphic design stuff. And then I have a couple of storage units and another glass studio that's in the east of France, which is a smaller studio.
Okay. The two glass studios do different things, or how do they dovetail?
So the smaller studio in Alsace is a little bit like a prep kitchen where they basically do a lot of glass preparation for me, and they prepare some elements so I can maximize my production here in Paris.
And how many people have you got working for you now? Are we a big operation?
Yes. Yeah, it's a big operation. As of now, I think we are 20. There's 4 people in the glass studio, 2 people in the metal shop, and then 2 other people in the glass studio in Alsace. And then the rest of the team is, shipping, handling, administration, human resources, client relations, project managers. Yeah, I'm probably forgetting a few.
Yeah. Does this mean you have to manage? If you have 20 people, are you managing people? How do you find that?
I do have to manage. I have to manage a lot. It's a learning curve. When I started blowing glass, I never thought that I would have to manage so many people. My aspirations at the beginning were to create, and to create I needed a studio, and once I had the studio, then it just all snowballed into this sort of big machine. And it's a learning curve. It's not something I went to school for. It's something that I have to learn with the greatest humility every day, and at the same time just kind of have the confidence of somebody that knows what they're doing. So it's it's quite a journey.
Because your website is divided into 3 distinct categories. There's lighting, sculpture, and furniture. How do these 3 areas of your practice work together, I wonder? Are they distinct?
It's one of the toughest and most fundamental questions, because at the beginning of everything, at the source of it all, there's creativity. And, I've never thought about creativity as anything else but just creativity. And as I've grown and matured and also tried eventually one day to sell my work, once I was sort of done with learning the craft, I started discovering different categories of places where I could sell my work. So, initially I was making sculptures. I wasn't trying to get into the art world. But then somebody asked me one day to actually a Vessel in London.
Angel.
Yeah. Angel. Asked me one day to make a light. And, and I just I'd never made a light before. And to be honest, I wasn't really excited about the idea of putting a light bulb in my work. But I did it out of pure necessity. And I discovered this incredible world of design and decoration. And So I started developing a lot of lights. And then eventually as I built my business and built my studio, I never let go of the sculpture side of my work. And I've just kind of been weaving in and out of the sculptural world. The lighting for me, the design, the furniture, the lighting, that part is more the poetry of what I do. It's I have the ingredients, I have the passion, I have a certain taste that I've been developing. And then the sculpture side is really the science. It's more of where my curiosity is. As an artist, I'm always trying to resolve this question of the universe through hot glass. It's very scientific, it's very research-based, and also very abstract. Lighting and furniture, there's something very specific about it where there's parameters that are very functional, right? So you need it to light, you need it to hold straight, and so on and so forth. So yeah, those are the worlds that I have been developing.
I was going to ask if you did one for the love and one for the money, but it's all for the love.
No.
One for the universe, right?
Yeah, it's a little bit like, for me, design is, like I said, it's poetry. It's at the center of both of those things is my passion for hot glass, right? And in order to have a conversation with the hot glass, I needed to learn how to work with it. Or in other words, I needed to translate. I needed to learn a language with which I could translate whatever it is that I was trying the conversation I was trying to have with this hot glass. And so at the base of all of it is this conversation, and it's also, it took about 10 years of traveling from studio to studio and country to country, putting on the blue uniform, working in studios in a very disciplined way, going in the morning, learning the craft, leaving at night, basically just learning the language of glass. That was sort of the fundamentals of what I was trying to achieve. And then once I developed the language, the design part really was more, I kind of use that language. Like, that's what I mean. It's more like poetry, freestyle, it's like a good musician that gets into jazz, it's just using the keys and the notes that you've picked up and you just kind of put them out there. There's no sort of emotional consequence to what I'm doing, apart from maybe looking for a certain kind of beauty or exploring a certain kind of aesthetic. The sculpture side is completely different. I really stay focused on the energy of the hot glass itself. Actually nowadays, both really fit in together, because the design wasn't so much about making money, but the design part also permitted me to keep my skills at a place where the fluidity of the conversation just stayed pertinent enough. The thing is with glassblowing is that it's so incredibly difficult. It is really one of the most difficult crafts out there. So
there's a couple of things I was going to ask you about that, Jeremy. One of which is, now you're 20 strong and you have project managers and you're managing. Are you still blowing glass as often as you used to yourself?
Oh yeah, I haven't blown this much glass ever. I think last year I did. I think we did over 15 tons of glass, and pretty much all of it was through my hands. Obviously I have a team. You can't glass blowing. You can almost not do it by yourself. So I definitely have a team behind me. But yeah, no, I have to stay close to the glass. I'm not very good at creating on a computer, or I think a lot about glass. I think, if I'm working enough, then the conversation stays fluid in my head. And then when I go home at night, I just keep that momentum going.
Do you dream glass?
The conversations that I have with the glass definitely influence the dreams that I can have. Yeah. So I have many times woken up with certain influences that I resolved in my dreams. Interesting.
Perhaps for listeners, some of whom will be familiar with the process, but many won't, could you talk us through your process of making a piece?
Yeah.
Do you draw in the first instance, or how do you come up with the things you come up with?
So personally, yes, I draw. I draw a lot. I have notebooks everywhere. I'm always doodling because I'm always trying to figure things out. And especially at the beginning, because glassblowing is such a technical medium, and for the first years, if you don't go to school, or if you try and do it like me, where you just go and work in studios, you can spend the first years barely touching the pipe or the glass.
Right.
You can just end up sweeping studios or making coffee, or so just shielding. And it's a process where you get in close to the material very slowly. you have to get used to the heat, you have to get used to the team, you have to get used to all those dynamics. And so at the beginning, especially, I was drawing so much because I had this frustration of not being able to create anything. But the process itself of glassblowing is the best way that I can describe it. It's like having a big pot of honey, right? And you know how you can just, with a spoon, you go into a pot of honey and you have to kind of turn your spoon when you come out of the honey so that it doesn't drip everywhere.
Yeah.
Glassblowing is exactly that. You have a big pot of honey, you go in with a pipe and you start turning. And once you start turning, you basically turn until you're finished with the piece. Because if you ever stop turning, that's pretty much it for the piece, right? And you basically start from a amorphic liquid, which is matter that has no shape or takes on the shape of whatever it's in. And you basically guide this liquid at the end of a pipe. As it's cooling, you guide it into a shape. And in order to do so, you need to create a center of gravity, right? So you turn the pipe, which is a centrifugal force, which goes against the natural gravity of the earth. And basically that rotation is going to carry this liquid until the end of the piece. And once you're done with the piece, then you break it off the pipe, put it in what's called an annealer, and the piece will rest in the annealer overnight and cool down to room temperature.
And then you're done.
Well, that's the hot glass part.
Yeah.
And then you have to go into the cold working, that's in a nutshell basically what you do. So you're guiding this hot lava, which doesn't want to do anything else but cut you, burn you. I've been working glass for 23 years, and it still burns me just like 23 years ago. It doesn't matter if I've given my entire life to this material. It doesn't care. And it's incredibly technical. It's very sensitive to temperature differences. It's very sensitive to thermal shock. It's very sensitive to everything, really. I don't look at it as a living entity as much as a source of life. The heat aspect and the liquid aspect, it's a source of life, right? Life begins in a puddle, right? And life begins with heat. The difference between a living body and a dead body is usually its temperature, right? You touch a dead body, it's usually pretty cold. So there's something about that. There's something about that liquid that does have for me, sort of a source of life. Also, it's when a volcano explodes, it spits out lava. Most of that lava is actually molten sand, right? And lava is, it's the veins of the earth. It's what kind of keeps the earth at a certain temperature and so on and so forth. So yeah, for me, it has really this inherent life quality in terms of being a source of life.
It's important to point out that this is physical work as well, isn't it? You're talking very poetically about something, but creating these pieces can literally be backbreaking.
Oh, it starts by being physical work. It's nothing else. You can't go about it any other way. You have to start on the physical side of it. There's a physical relationship before there's any other relationship. Like when I was saying it, 23 years and it still burns me the same way it does like at the beginning. Not only can you break your back, and of course it's incredibly physical, but one of the more interesting aspects that I find with glassblowing is because it's so hot, the first times that you get near it, your body goes into flight or fight mode, right? So you get a huge spike in adrenaline. Your body just wants to run away, but you need to stay there. And you need to focus, and you need to control your movement, and so on and so forth. And as a glassblower, you basically spend your time regulating this adrenaline, because you carry that adrenaline for your entire career. Anytime you blow glass, your body does that. And you can see when people start blowing glass, usually even the most fluid people, right? Somebody that does yoga and the moment they take a gather, their entire body freezes. Because the brain in a flight or fight mode, the brain function shrinks to basic necessities, right? You have to fight that at the beginning. You have to really focus on telling yourself, it's going to be okay. I need to turn this pipe. And it's the simplest thing, right? You can just take a broom in your kitchen and turn the handle and no big deal. You put hot molten lava at the end of that stick and you'll see your body's articulation just changes. There's physical and then there's that physical. You can kind of tell the beginning of a glassblower's career depending on how he blows glass today. Some glassblowers have sort of taken on that nervous energy from the beginning and just turned it into kind of like a fight, right? And even though they've been blowing glass for 30 years, they're just into this, it's like this battle. I worked for maestros in Murano that were like that, right? I mean, they were just incredibly physical with this energy. I mean, they were almost angry, and it was fascinating. I mean, I absolutely loved working with them. There's other glass blowers that do the complete opposite, where they take that energy and just turn it into like this sort of peaceful strength, and they try and keep everything very fluid and very calm, and try and channel that energy and try and flow more with the glass. The body kind of has to be liquid like the glass, which is something that takes a long time to sort of master.
Which are you, Jeremy?
I'm kind of neither or. So I personally have, when I started blowing glass, it was like I had two left hands. I was definitely not the most talented one in the group. So I've had to compensate for that. I really wasn't good at for the first few years. I've definitely acquired the calm, fluid side. For me, that is the one that works best for me because I'm not the biggest person physically, right? I'm not built like a rugby player. I'm just kind of a shorter guy. So being using just brute force with the glass, it just doesn't work. Being more of a ninja samurai type, that takes me a little further.
I'm liking that. The ninja of glass blowing, I'm rather liking.
Yeah.
That could be your strap line, right?
I mean, there is, the way I've been talking about it, there definitely is like a warrior approach to the glass, right? I mean, because like I said, it's a hostile material.
Yeah.
It will burn your face off.
Yeah.
It doesn't have a problem with it, Over the years, I've seen some pretty horrible things in the studio. It takes a certain kind of mindset to say, oh yeah, I'm going to do that for the rest of my life,
You straddle the worlds of art and design. We first came across each other when you had an installation at the V&A. I think 2014 it was like quite a long time ago now.
Yeah.
And you also had something at Fumi, who were over in Shoreditch at that point.
Yeah.
So you had both sides of the city covered, which was interesting. One was more sculptural and the other was, you made with your own hands. And they were both sculptural, but you made one with your own hands and the other was more of a kind of conceptual piece, I guess you'd say. Do you think glass blowing gets the respect it deserves from the worlds of design and art?
Ooh, vast question.
Well, that's my job.
It's like poking the bear. No, the short answer to the question is no, definitely not. It's such an interesting problem to solve. I kind of have to be everything at the same time, but it all comes from the craft. Let me put it this way. If glassblowing has been around for 6,000 years, right? And, it started basically in Mesopotamia and then worked its way up into Europe, Northern Europe, and then much later on spread around the world. The way it did that is through basically imitation. So when you work for a master, when you work for a glassblower, most of the time he can explain things to you or he can try, but it's such a complicated and abstract craft that the best way to learn is really to imitate him and imitating his moves. And as you do that, you kind of break down how it's done and you figure it out for yourself. And this takes years. I mean, this takes a lifetime sometimes. I mean, it's so complicated that you can make, a bottle, a nice bottle with blue. You just change the color and that changes everything in the way you're making that bottle. So just the color change is crazy.
How does it change everything, Jeremy?
Well, I mean, it depends on the color, but if you go from say a blue to a red is a much of a stiffer color. So it's going to cool down a lot faster. It's also going to react to heat differently. Most reds are very sensitive to heat. So you can't heat them very much, otherwise you lose the red. They turn brown. So suddenly you go from making a bottle with blue, which is a very soft, very nice sort of fluid color, which comes with its own challenges because it is so soft and fluid. Then you go and you try and make it in red. The timing is going to be different. The angles are going to be different. Everything just changes, right? Just because of that. Anyway, and so for 6,000 years of this craft, if you look up a book on glassblowing, so to learn glassblowing, you'll basically find 2, right? So 6,000 years of glassblowing, you'll find 2 books on how to blow glass. I mean, I'm exaggerating. Maybe there's 10 of them, but
Okay.
but eight of them.
I was believing you, by the way. But anyway.
Well, no. But 8 of them are basically useless.
Okay.
There's beginner glassblowing and advanced glassblowing, which was written by a guy called Schmidt, I think. It's an incredible book, really. I mean, he's the one that gets the closest to, if you knew nothing about glassblowing and there was nobody around and you had a furnace and a book, you might be able to kind of start figuring stuff out with this book. But otherwise, that's it, right? I mean, if I say the same thing about woodworking, go look for a woodworking book on how to woodwork. You're going to find tens of thousands easily. Pottery, same thing, right? But glassblowing, it's so complicated, it's so abstract that you can't even find a book. The knowledge is so precious that you need a studio, you need an ecosystem in which you can go in and absorb this knowledge. And so, yes, nowadays, people from the outside don't know this. They don't realize this. Artists, designers, and I think it's too bad because they also don't really create. They don't contribute in creating environments where this is sustainable, which is why glassblowing is unfortunately the kind of art form which is I think is really disappearing quite fast.
I mean, it's interesting. There have been in the UK, I'm going to talk about, I guess, primarily because that's the place I know best, but there have been major exhibitions devoted to textiles, such as the retrospective Annie Albers at Tate Modern and various shows on clay, including Strange Clay at the Hayward. The art world appears to be embracing materiality again over the last few years. Do you get the sense it's the turn of glass next? Are you poised?
I definitely think that glass is, right now glass is definitely trending. We'll put it that way.
Right.
Especially in the very high-end design world. I hope so. I hope that glass gets as much as textile and ceramic and wood. But, the huge advantages that textile and ceramic and all these other materials have, they're also not as heavy economically, right? Because you also, at the end of the day, you kind of always come down to money, which is a big deal. And money in glass, it's an expensive habit. It's an incredibly expensive habit. In order to make glass, you need the proper equipment, and having the proper equipment is expensive. So you need the space, you need the equipment, you need the knowledge on how to make the glass, even if you have the equipment. And then once you launch your equipment, so a furnace, once you turn your furnace on, it's on all the time, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and you're basically burning energy. So when I'm sleeping, my bill is just turning, right? So for all those reasons, glass has so many challenges in front of it. But it's, it puts up a good fight. It has a lot of advantages that other materials don't.
Well, it does. And I'm going to posit something to you, and I'm interested to see how you respond. Because one of the criticisms of glass and glass art is that the material itself is so inherently beautiful in the way it plays with light that artists can be or seem conceptually lightweight. In other words, it's too focused on beauty and technique and can seem a little vacuous. Is that something you recognize within the world you inhabit?
Oh, definitely. I see it another way. If you take on everything that I've told you about how complicated glassblowing is, right, and how expensive it is, and basically all the sacrifices it takes just to become a glassblower, you also need to be physically. You need to be the kind of person that gets up early in the morning and can, physically work hard all day and then go home at night, right? So that's a very sort of crafty lifestyle, right? One would almost say I don't know how you say in English, ouvrier, somebody works at a factory, right? Like a very blue collar mentality, right? And so if you go through all those sacrifices, all the money, and so on and so forth, you eventually open your studio, you're in many ways, and this is what I see, I think people get trapped in that. They get trapped in that mindset and all the techniques they've acquired and all the, they get trapped inside of those things because they need to justify that long and painful road. They just kind of get a little stuck in that, right? Like oftentimes actually glass blowers, they make one thing that they get recognized for and then that's all they do, right? Because they're just kind of stuck in that cycle, which is really hard to break out of because again, the journey is so complicated. And then for people that work glass from the outside, so designers and artists, they just don't have that. For me, they just don't have that emotional relationship that you need with the glass in order to get inside of it and just go deeper with it, right? Because they just don't have that sacrifice inside of them. They don't have that pain and they don't have that heat and they don't have all all that stuff inside of them. They don't, they don't have those huge calluses on their hands that are just, so, the decisions, I think the inspiration that they get is, it only just begins to scratch the surface of what glass has to offer, especially in the creative worlds.
Why glass for you, Jeremy?
Glass. Why glass? I've had many answers to this question. Before I met hot glass, I was incredibly creative. I've been playing with creativity since I was 5. So, painting, sculpting, drawing. I mean, really just obsessed with it, with the process of creation and just creativity in general. Woodworking. I did a lot of woodworking when I was a kid too. When I met glass for the first time, hot glass, not cold glass, because I met cold glass very young. But when I met hot glass for the first time, it just grabbed me by my soul. There was something so incredibly intense about it. I think we just met each other. I think I still am pretty sure I still am a pretty intense person. And there was something very intense about the glass. And I just kind of met my match. Right. I mean, I had been through the wood and the clay and the paint. And none of it was really, as much as I was doing it, none of it was doing what glass did to me when I met it for the first time, the hot glass. When I met hot glass for the first time, it was just dripping at the end of a pipe. I think it looked like a beginner had taken his first gather or something. It was just the tiniest little piece of glass just dripping at the end of a pipe. I just saw that. And within 3 seconds, I knew, I was going to do that for the rest of my life. I knew it was going to be incredibly complicated. I knew it was going to take everything that I had. And I probably had very little chance of succeeding at doing anything with it. But I'd resolved this one big question that a lot of people have, which is, what am I going to do for the rest of my life? And there it was,
I mean, you had a serious car accident on a road trip that seems to have been quite pivotal in your career.
I've had a lot of I've had a lot of moments that were pivotal in my career.
Well, we might come on to one or two of those later, but
glass. I mean, if you want to go that route, I fell in a pile of glass when I was 5.
Right.
I tore my entire left arm up. When I was 21. So I discovered glass blowing around 18, 19. And as much as it grabbed me by my soul, I was also, young and I was traveling and I was working. I had all these little jobs. And for a couple of years, I don't think I took it as seriously as I should have. It was there, it was really there, but there was a lot of other things there that life, I was kind of discovering life. I was an adult in 2001, I had a car accident and I went through the windshield of a car and the glass basically tore my body open in all kinds of ways. And I almost died. And as I was lying there having a near-death experience, the one thing I was really sad about was that I hadn't gone as far as I wanted with the glass. I really hadn't dedicated I hadn't matched what I had felt when I met the glass. And this was something that was very clear when I was, as the lights were going out. And I was very lucky. The lights didn't go out. I was saved. And as I was broken, I had broken bones and a torn up body. And eventually, after 4 or 5 months, was able to walk again with a cane. And for those 4 or 5 months, I basically only read books on glass artists and anything I could find about glass. And the moment I could start walking with a cane, that was the beginning. And I just, I walked into the first studio that would accept me. And from that point on, I never looked back.
It's interesting. You're not the only glassblower to have had that kind of experience that I've spoken to. Do you know Morten Klitschgaard, the Danish glass artist? Creates extraordinary kind of almost black glass. Mm-hmm. He was left dangling off an oil rig and very nearly drowned. And when he recovered, he decided that he needed to spend the rest of his life working with glass. So it's a fascinating thing.
I should talk to him. There is something about hot glass and this sort of idea of the source of life, right? When you look into hot glass, it's so mesmerizing. It's, I say this to myself, it's a bit crazy, but for me, the answer to life is in hot glass, right? It's in there somewhere and I'm going to find it. I'm going to find the answer. It's taken me on so many incredible roads, this question of the origins, right? I am looking for the origins of life through glass, which is kind of a crazy concept. But that question has taken me on incredible journeys. I mean, I meet astrophysicists. I do big shows that talk about the research and I mean, any glassblower, you meet any glassblower, passionate glassblower, we all share this common thing, right? Like,
well, you've talked about it as an obsession, and you've also talked about how you've lost relationships over it.
Oh yeah, I've lost everything over it. I lost my money. I lost my relationships. I've lost myself a few times. I always describe it as like, the furnace is like it's the thing you throw everything in. It just all burns away. But that's also what's really interesting about the furnace and the glass. One of the things that fascinates me a lot about glass blowing and working with glass is that it's when 99.9% of materials sort of disappear at that temperature, silica glass comes alive, right? So it's like, if you think about it in terms of consciousness, for me, it's kind of like this, the material is like in a higher state of consciousness. It exists in this place that we all come from, right? Like the universe was incredibly hot before it was cool, right? So this material is kind of like on the edge of the beginning, right? It's closer to the beginning than we are. I can talk about this for hours, right? Because the hot glass, it's something I never stop thinking about. So
I hope you're enjoying the show. I just want to say thank you to everyone who visited and exhibited at the Material Matters Fair in September. And of course, a huge thanks go to our headline sponsor, the lighting specialist Bert Frank, as well as our other sponsors. The fair will return to Barge House, Oxo Tower Wharf next September from the 18th to the 21st. If you're interested in exhibiting, do drop me a line at hello@materialmatters.design. That's hello@materialmatters.design. Look out for more news on exciting live events happening next year in the very near future. Can we talk about your background? I know, Juliet, your delightful and very efficient PR told me you're keen not to dwell on it, and that's fair enough. I guess because you did that feature-length documentary, 2016, Heart of Glass, where you really exposed yourself. Personally, I would suggest, Jeremy. I mean, did you enjoy doing that, I wonder?
that was a very intense exercise.
Was it cathartic?
I'll tell you, when I got into the creative world, the design gallery, whatever, in Paris, as a glassblower, it was almost like something that diminished my value, if that makes sense. Because I worked with my hands as a craftsman, that was seen as like kind of under, right? Like that for me was so incredibly hard, right? Like, because for me, from where I come from, the people that have ideas and that make their ideas, like, wow, and the history of craft and what craft means, and and for everything, right? Like culturally, I mean, if it wasn't for craft, all of this wouldn't exist. Craft is just craft saved my life. Craft. I mean, it's always giving back to the craft. I mean, it's very important. And there I was in and I was just and I was fighting. I was trying to exist as a craftsman. And that was a problem. Like, the art galleries would say, oh yeah, but you can't, we can't represent your work because you're a craftsman, which is just a very weird thing to hear.
Yeah.
And the people that, sat behind desks and did drawings, those guys were recognized as creators, and the people that made the work for them, nobody really ever heard about. And so this for me was just so violent. It was so hard that reality was just so hard to digest. So when this opportunity came up to do this documentary, I figure I've had such a crazy life. I've had such a tragic life in a way, right? Traumatic life, tragic life, whatever. I figure it would be a good move to attach spirit to the hand, right? Because like in France, like they separate the hand and the head. Right. It's like they talk about the hand like it's something that's separate from the head. There's the thinkers and then there's the doers. Like somehow the doers can't think, which is kind of really strange. And so that's kind of what I told myself when I did this exercise. And I figured I'll sacrifice my intimacy for this sort of cause of like reattaching the hand and the head kind of situation. And and it was also, it was at a time when my career was taking off, right? I mean, that's when we met, and that's when I did the V&A and da-da-da. And also I had a good friend who was a very talented guy that made documentaries. He saw me take off. He knew me well. He had this idea about making a sort of filming the moment. And then the movie came out.
How was it when the movie came out? I mean, because I've co-founded a film festival actually about craft. I was keen to get your film in, but it was a bit long for our purposes. And it is a curious thing seeing you yourself or other people that you know on a huge screen.
Yeah, it's, I'm going to be I'm going to be honest with you and all the people that are going to be listening to this. I still haven't seen it.
Excellent. I was not expecting that answer.
Yeah, no, I still haven't seen it. It's an incredible honor, and there's many parts of the project that were incredible. And Jérôme, the guy who did the movie, just there was so much about it that was incredible. But then at the same time, my work is about my work, right? It's not really about my life. Like, my life doesn't really have to do anything with my work. Maybe the tragic and the trauma and the intensity and all that fuels the research, right? And how I just may be able to just go for it. Or actually, maybe it does feed a certain sense of like, I do have this obsession of looking to belong, right? So, so I lost my family, I'm an orphan, and so maybe looking for the origins of life or origins of the universe through glass is something that I'm doing.
Okay.
It's like the orphan in me that's kind of trying to figure that out.
For people who haven't seen the movie, you and your brother were brought up on the west coast of Africa. And what did your parents do?
So I grew up in Cameroon, Gabon, and Ivory Coast. My father was worked on plantations, and my mother basically NGO work. Right.
And you're obviously making, as a child, you've kind of alluded to the fact that it was a creative household.
Oh yeah. It was very, very creative. There was many. My mother was, full blown hippie, and my dad was definitely not an office guy. He was kind of salt of the earth kind of guy. He was a farmer, or, a farmer at heart. And we grew up in places where there was really not much, schools or anything to do. So, but there was a lot of craft. There was a lot of people around making stuff. So we kept busy making stuff. Like I said, that's why I was saying, I did a lot of clay work, when I was a kid, because my mother would take me to the market and she would put us to work. I worked for a guy making pots, when I was 8 or 9, in this market. Yeah, just to keep us busy. So, and that's also the thing. And I think that's also why, craft is it's such a big part of my life. I grew up outside the box, right? Of like school and culture. And, I grew up somewhere else. And I grew up in an area where craft was kind of everything, right? Like where I lived, if you needed a chair, you had to go ask somebody to make one, pay somebody to do that. And in order to do that, you needed to create a relationship with that person. You can just go and get the chair. So for me, craft was like this almighty powerful thing, that like linked people. And, I know my father and both my parents had a lot of friends in the craft world. I mean, we had craftsmen at the house all the time for dinners, for parties. My dad loved hanging out with these people. So, for me, it was all very normal,
And is Africa imprinted on you? I'm interested in the colours, the textiles that you're sitting on, which obviously listeners won't be able to see, but they're very colourful. And I'm just wondering whether this background, living in Africa for 13, 14 years, has kind of enhanced a sense of colour, or whether that's just a big cliche.
No, not at all. The wall behind me is made of African textiles. Every work that I make and send out into the world is wrapped in that textile. So any client that receives a work of mine, I always send my work out with a piece of Africa for all kinds of reasons. But that's definitely for me it's a very personal thing. I carry that with me. But to answer your question about color, yes, colors, especially in equatorial Africa, are a lot more vibrant. I think it's because that's where the earth is closest to the sun, right? So there's a certain kind of light frequency there that is incredibly intense. It's very rich in life, right? It's vegetation is abundant. And also, this is something that I've always carried with me, but, I was just recently back in Africa actually, and this is something that marked me when I was a kid, but they wear color.
Yeah.
Right. Like there is no, like, they let loose when it comes to color. Like they don't hold back, right? They can mix like so many different kinds of colors and patterns. And I find it so beautiful.
And then, and I don't want to dwell on this particularly, but there was this huge trauma. Your mother committed suicide. Your father burst a blood vessel in his brain and was left needing 24-hour care until he died 7 years later. You were 13, 14 at the time, and that happened in front of you. I mean, how did that affect you, Jeremy?
Well, it definitely broke me. It definitely broke me in all kinds of ways. It's been 30 years, and actually, last week I went back, or 2 weeks ago I went back for the first time in 30 years since I left, since all that happened to me. It broke me, but at the same time, because I grew up over there, I was surrounded with an incredibly resilient people and an incredibly powerful people. When I think of my childhood, I think I saw a lot of, hunger and diseases and wars, but then I also saw a lot of smiles and music and color, and I was surrounded with just really resilient, powerful people. When I think of my childhood, I think of smiles more than anything else. I think of big smiles and music and the sun and the colors and when all that stuff started happening to me, I think there was a part of me that just figured, well, now it's my turn, right? Like now life is happening, but if all these people around me can do it, I can do it, kind of thing, right? But yeah, it definitely broke me. I mean, overnight, basically in the span of a year, I lost everything. And I was brought back to France and as an orphan and thrown into French school and had to live through winters and wear shoes and
yeah, lived with your aunt. I mean, it must have been, never mind what happened in your personal, but just moving back to Europe must have been a massive culture shock.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, just going to school was a very strange thing for me because the schools I went to were very unique, right? Where I grew up, schools were very unique.
What were you like at school?
Oh, I was a terror. I mean, I was a kid that was broken, angry. I didn't understand any codes. I didn't have any social code. I didn't understand anything, I mean, to be honest with you, I lasted maybe a year and a half in the first one before they kicked me out.
I mean, in the film, and maybe this answers it slightly, in the film you talk about there being a destructive pattern to your life.
Oh, yeah.
How did that manifest itself?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the cycles of destruction in my life were, the obvious one and the most common one, is substance abuse. I definitely started using substances. After my mother's suicide, I started drinking and I was 13. And I wasn't drinking like, for fun at the party. I was, I was drinking straight vodka just to just numb the pain, and then that led to drugs and all kinds of things. But I was also very destructive. I was also physically hurting myself. I tried to commit suicide a couple of times. I obviously didn't really want to, but I would hurt my body in all kinds of ways. Yeah, I did that till I was basically 21, until a car accident. The car accident was a big turning point, like you said. And then it took a few more years after the car accident to get rid of the bad habits of the drugs and the alcohol. But
so is it trite to ask if glass saved you?
I mean, on paper, it looks like it did, didn't it?
Does a bit.
Yeah, it's. I wonder if did glass save me? Did my passion for glass save me? In a way, I think Africa saved me as well. There's something very tangible about craft, material and craft. There's something incredibly tangible about that. It really solidifies things around you, and especially when you're like me, you broken all over the place, kind of a wild child, and pretty much lost in the world. Having to connect physically with a material and disciplining your body around this material in order to achieve things, I think that just does a lot of good. It brings a lot of peace. It brings meaning back. It slowly brings a certain kind of sense back. I know it did for me. I mean, that's for sure. What I mean is I don't really want to just, I think I'm past the point of just saying it's all glass, right? Like, I think glass is just kind of the metaphor, but I found something very tangible to hold on to. And that's also, I think, why I'm so adamant about being a craftsman and promoting craft and building a studio that is going to last in time and going to create jobs in the craft world. All those things are very important to me. That's also why I think this whole thing just keeps growing, right? Because the more I can create jobs, I think the more I can give back to the community that also took me in, right? Like the glassblowing community took me in for 10 years. I mean, I traveled around the world, met some incredible people that showed me their knowledge. A maestro in Murano was there for me at some point when, I hit rock bottom.
You worked for Chihuly as well, which I didn't know.
I didn't work directly for Chihuly. I worked temporarily on one of his teams. I don't know if it still is today, but back in the 90s and early 2000s, Chihuly was a big deal. He still is, but I mean, he's, actually this is one of the, he is the most generous person, that I've ever came across in terms of like craft and glass blowing and giving back to the community. I mean, this guy, I was very lucky. I was very lucky to be able to temporarily work on one of his teams for a short while. That was a huge inspiration for sure.
So now you're successful, Jeremy, and you have 20 people working for you, known internationally. Do you feel more content?
What's the real contentness in my life today is that thanks to because I've been pursuing what I've been pursuing for 24 years, I finally started to find some serenity in the process and the conversation that I'm having with the material. If I can say it another way, I think I've blown glass so much that I finally started getting out of my system. Like I said, I mean, last year we did over 15 tons of glass, Yeah. So, and then, I mean, there is a certain kind of peace you find when you don't have to worry about, how you're going to pay the bills in a month. But then at the same time, this is old as time, but, I'm responsible for 20 people, which is a whole other kind of pressure and intensity. When you're at the center and you're the creative and you're the craftsman and all of those people's jobs and paychecks rely on your capability of getting up in the morning, coming in, blowing glass and being creative. It's a very interesting place to be in because you really have to learn how to not let that pressure get in the way of your process, or, which is something that I do sometimes, is I use it, right? When I'm maybe if I'm at a crossroads and I'm having a hard time making a creative decision, or I'm maybe missing some inspiration, I just open up that valve of pressure and plenty of energy comes out of that one. Just walking around. I just walk around the studio and I just go have a chat with all the people, that are working around me, and kicks things back into gear. It's really interesting also too, being in the middle of Paris, having creating a studio, and now which is basically a company around a craftsman, is something that I think about all the time, because I don't think that exists anymore. And I don't think that this is something that, I have a hard time finding other people that are doing this, right? That are creating an economic ecosystem, because usually, like, typically a glassblower will work for a brand or or if it's a big designer or a big artist, they will build their own studios and then hire the craftsmen and so on and so forth. But to be the craftsman around which you build everything, which means, I'm the glassblower that comes in and makes the work. But then I've built this entire company around me. It's really interesting. I mean, it's a fascinating thing. Every day I'm learning. It's very humbling as well to think like, all these people are basically spending more time with you, helping you create stuff than they're spending at home with, their families. And, so it's quite it's quite an adventure. I'm not going to lie. Never stops, man. It never stops.
Our time is nearly up, Jeremy, unfortunately, because I could talk for quite a lot longer. But final question. I mean, what can we expect from you in the future? Where is your work going to go?
Well, so as you said at the beginning, my work is, when you go on my website, my work is divided between lighting, furniture, and sculpture, right? But for me, at the base of it, I never thought about creativity being segmented. Today, recently, now that things have really gotten to another level, I'm finding myself in a place where I'm really kind of letting those barriers fall, in between the lighting and the sculpture and the furniture. I'm really trying to come through. I think it would be really amazing to be recognized both in the contemporary art world and the design world as a craftsman, if that makes sense. Because nobody's done it, like it's like mission impossible. You're either like a designer, or you're an artist, or you're a craftsman. But you can't be three of them. You can't be all three, which is very strange. So I think the future is, I just keep breaking the barriers in between those segments, and just keep pushing through the creativity, and hopefully, if I'm able to keep creating more jobs and a stable company that's economically viable, so that those jobs can last for a long time, long enough that we can take on more people that can learn the craft and so on and so forth. Because that's the thing that we also don't, nobody ever talks about. But behind the studio, there's at the base of this studio, there is the desire to build something that gives back to the community that I come from, and contributes to the solution of glassblowing and craft in general, sort of becoming reclaiming their space in culture, and being beacons of light again, like they were, in the past. So yeah, I think that's a pretty good goal for the future. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it is. Reclaiming craft space and culture. I rather like that. It's a lovely way to finish. Jeremy, thank you so much for your time. I found that absolutely fascinating. It was wonderful to meet you.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was great talking to you. Always a fun exercise.
To find out more about Jeremy, go to jeremymaxwellwintrebert.com. As ever, to find other podcasts that I've done and to sign up to our newsletter, go to materialmatters.design. And there are images relating to the interviews on our Instagram page, which is also materialmatters.design. Finally, this is really important too. If you've enjoyed listening and want to see this podcast flourish, then please rate and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to us from. And it would make me incredibly happy if you went to my Patreon page and made a pledge at patreon.com/materialmatters. For as little as £2.50 a month, you can receive invites to various Material Matters events, as well as getting access to each episode before it's published to the wider world. Material Matters is a completely independent concern, and any help you can offer would be hugely appreciated. Ultimately, you'll be helping to take the message of the importance of materials, skill, craft, and design to a whole new audience. Thanks very much for listening.